This is Dialogue. Dialogue, a presentation of the Public Affairs and Special Events Department of KLRB News.
And this is Dialogue Assassination with political research specialist Mae Brussell. And I'm Phil Kogan. Glad you could join us for this show. I'm glad you could be here again, Mae, for the 923,000th broadcast. Seems like a lot of shows.
Somebody thought you were being sarcastic. They asked me if you were antagonistic. You know, they listened to the show and they said, is he putting you on? I said, I don't think so. It's his sense of humor. Does it seem like the 9,000?
Bad sense of humor.
Okay. You should say the first show. Each week is a new one.
This is the first show in a continuing series.
That's right. Each one is a new series, each new show. So it's the first show of the continuing series. Why don't you explain what the series is?
Want me to explain?
Yeah, you explain it this time.
Oh, wow.
I want to see if you understand it.
What am I doing here? This is a program dealing with political assassinations and the evidence and lack of evidence concerning those assassinations, the people involved in the assassinations, the people who are linked through evidence to the assassinations that aren't linked through evidence in courts of law, and a general relationship between the assassinations and what's happening on a day-to-day basis in the news.
Very good.
Do I get an A?
You get an A. Okay, and we'll take the news this week just briefly because we have a lot of material to cover. There was an article in the San Jose Mercury from Gerald Ford, and I like to relate this to the political assassinations. Gerald Ford, for those of you who do not remember, was a member of the Warren Commission who was supposed to investigate the John Kennedy assassination. He's a leader of the GOP in the House, and he's attacking Jack Anderson and Senator Ed Kennedy for embarrassing Mr. Kleinis and Mitchell and President Nixon about the Lita Baird letter. And he is accusing them of a political conspiracy that they're ganging up against the Republicans. There's a sentence I want to read to you that is a typical Gerald Ford sentence, and he should be the one to know what it is. In his attack on Anderson, Ford said that the columnist, in quotes, had used the universally discredited technique of multiple hearsay to substantiate his charges, a gimmick which involves the presentation of evidence 3 or 4 times removed from the source. It is virtually impossible to verify the accuracy or the veracity of this kind of evidence, and Mr. Anderson knows it, in quotes. Mr. Ford knows it, too, because that's what the Warren report was. It involved 3 or 4 times removed people, and they're all hearsay, and I've spent 8 years cross-filing the origin of the hearsay. He speaks about multiple hearsay and discredited techniques. This is the expert of them all, and he should know. So I'd like that sentence because it defines the Warren report. Last week we had a guest here, Richard Sprague, on the Peninsula. He came to talk to the computer department of the Navy Postgraduate School. Mr. Sprague met over at Monterey Peninsula College last Saturday evening. We had a wonderful crowd. And I was telling you about it, Phil. It's too bad you couldn't be here. There are over 200 young people, and it really made me feel good that the young people, they are listening and they're understanding. They were very intelligent. The meeting lasted until about 1:30 in the morning, full of questions and curiosity and growing awareness. And I really felt good that people are understanding the nature of the political assassinations. And we have one problem in communication to get to these people. You showed such interest and enthusiasm in attending this meeting that
you had a lot of people there.
We had a lot of people, and it was a very intelligent, marvelous questions, intelligent crowd, and the nucleus of something that could be very strong and good. And what I want people to do, I have the address or phone number of various persons who have written to me since the show's been on for 8 months. And some of those, we just notified them by word of mouth or called them or sent out postcards if they lived up in Watsonville or Castroville or up at Cabrillo College or Santa Cruz. But I want to give the address of the station here and my home address. And if you enjoyed that program, if you want to meet other researchers who are in town, and we don't have time between radio shows to get together, if they give me their phone number or address, we can get together. Because next week I'm having another visitor here, Bob Cutler from Manchester, Massachusetts. He's a professor of architecture and engineering at the University of Massachusetts, and it's a spring break now, and he's coming out to be with his in-laws and family on the West Coast, and he's making a special 2-day trip to Carmel to go over research with me. And Bob Cutler did the architectural drawings for computer automation in May 1970, May 1971, and in June, the 2 Mays, 1970 and 1971, of the Dealey Plaza. And you can buy copies of his architectural drawings locating where the assassin stood and what happened at Dealey Plaza if you want them. He sells those drawings. But he's coming out here. He's done a book he's just completed with Joe Justine, who lives in Europe, on the Chappaquiddick affair, how the CIA framed Ted Kennedy. And he has done the architectural work on the car, where it was, and the drawings, and the speed of the water pressure against the door, and the impossibility for him to have been in the car, to have opened the door, and so forth. So next week, I don't think we'll talk about the grassy knoll. We did a little bit on that with Richard Sprague last week. I think we'll talk about Ted Kennedy and the Chappaquiddick affair, because I've never done that for any of the shows. But if you people want to meet Mr. Cutler, it's hard on such a short notice. We're on the air on Saturday, and he'll be here Tuesday. But other people will be coming to Peninsula. Bill Turner's coming down from San Francisco. He worked with the FBI and quit. Had fights with Hoover, and he's written 3 books, 2 on the right wing, 1 on the police establishment, 1 on the FBI. So if there's a short time between the time we're on the air and when I can reach you people, if you send us cards with your address or phone number, I have volunteers and friends who listen to the show that can notify you. So write KLRB, Box 3904, Carmel, California. And if you want a mailing list, send a letter and maybe put in 5 stamps for 5 letters, or mimeograph sheets where I can send you titles of books from time to time if there's a large enough group that are really interested. But if you give me your address and it's out of town, enclose some stamps so we can send off letters to you in a hurry, because that's the best way to get to you in one day. And or you can send them to my home, Route 2, Box 3050, Carmel, California, 93921. Give your name, and if you live out of town, send an envelope with a few stamps. And if you're interested in meeting these people, I can get a room over at the college in the evening, and we can get together on short notice in case we don't have time between the air program. Or if even announcing on the air, there's some people that may miss 1 week. So thank you all for showing up. It was really a great group, and everyone who was there, I'm sure, enjoyed it. If we had more time, there would have been a lot more.
Yeah, if you miss the addresses or you can't write them down, if you just write KLRB Carmel, it will get to Mae. Just write Dialogue Assassination, KLRB Carmel. Or Mae's address is Route 2, Box 3050, also in Carmel, California.
And if you have a local, send your phone number if you want to be notified when these various people come to town. Or if you're out of town, send an envelope. Now, last week, the week before, we were in such a hurry, I mentioned a book called Dallas Conspiracy, and we forgot to give the address. We went off the air. The author is Nord Davis, Jr., Box 48, Hollis, New Hampshire. It's 50 cents. It's a good book. It's a book about the bullet trajectory, the famous bullet 399 that passes through President Kennedy and John Connally. It's only 50 cents. Mr. Nord Davis, Jr. is a member of the John Birch Society. He is looking for a communist bullet, but whether it's a communist bullet or CIA bullet, he doubts whether it could make that course, and he doubts all the physical evidence of the murder. His conclusion is right to J. Edgar Hoover, it's a communist, but you can read the book and sift out what you want. If Mr. Hoover thought it was a communist, he'd still be looking for them. The fact that he closed the case tells you either he's protecting the communists, so they shouldn't have so much trust in him, or that he's wrong on the assumption. But the physical evidence is not political. In these particular assassinations, I always say that 10 bullets in the ambassador are not Republican or Democratic bullets, and they don't belong to Sirhan, all of them. It's not a political matter. It's a matter of physical evidence and somebody telling a lie. One other book, Nocturnal Vaudeville. Can you write it down in the time we're on the air? By Stephen Schneck, S-C-H-N-E-C-K. It's a novel about a man who watches television, the evening news, and he is television, and he talks about John and Bobby and Martin and Manson, Oswald, Dallas, Assassinations, and Jack Ruby, and he begins, it's a radio television show, hello out there, hello, hello, all of you who dote on false fruits. and people stay up at night and watch the television. And he says the show is us. It's a reflection of us. And the Late Show, it's USA. That's what it is. And it begins with the announcer, what a show we have lined up for you tonight. All the previewing characteristics of the conspiracy. It's all here in your United States of Mystery. And he goes into all the individual single parts, he says, in a number of parts which, when added up, will total a killer, actually a number of killers, in fact, a network of killers and long-distance murderers. And he goes into how people are lulled into the evening news and watching the Sharon Tate massacre and all the... He says the sum of the parts, when divided by the number of killers and the conspirators, reveals a fraction of the number of available targets, winking and twinkling like stars far away. And this is like Hitler. He started with one and then with another. And the number of killers and conspirators is just a fraction of the many they can get to if they succeed. And he goes on to say it's nearer than you think that for us at Nocturnal Vaudeville. And then he has a sentence in there I quoted to read you. I copied down because it's the way I feel about the political assassinations, and I think it's important for you to know this. And he talks about Nocturnal Vaudeville, and he says there is nothing, absolutely nothing, that does not touch or make contact with us in some way at some point, and with everything else. And all objects and thoughts and people's dreams and desires and deeds and everything relating to everything else, everything in relation to everything else, and above all, every single thing is unique, and everything is interchangeable. And I like that quotation because people think that the political assassination of John Kennedy, President Kennedy, or Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, is something that doesn't affect us. You know what I mean, Phil? It does come down into the daily news and the things that affect our foreign policy and the way the country is going. The desperation, this week, the Black Caucus deciding we can't work with either political party. That news today is a fact because of the continuous murder of black people and not recognizing their needs, and by the political assassinations and the continuing of the legal policies of wiping out the black leaders in every walk of life. You force another course, which becomes absolutely necessary. The system doesn't work when you keep murdering off these leaders and they can't work within the system. They realize that the people in power now, Democrat or Republican, will never represent their particular needs. So I think this kind of feeling to be separated from the mainstream of America is realistic in lieu of the continuous murdering of black people that I have studied and analyzed. The system is not going to allow them to survive, just like the single black woman on the jury was removed in the Angela Davis case on some feeble excuse of her husband, in a bar arrest. The decision is made of what to do with Angela Davis, and they're not going to give her this chance if they can help it.
Well, if people are listening to Dialogue Assassination over the weeks and they follow up on some of the research, they read some of the books, and they listen carefully and maybe take a few notes, and they come to the conclusion that much of what you say, it's true, that it's all available there, and it just took you to point it out and tie it together. What do they do if they find themselves agreeing with you?
Well, if they find themselves agreeing with me, one of the things they do is that, first of all, this is an election year. Even in a non-election year, you can use this policy. Everybody that comes through this peninsula campaign, or everybody at a national level that may catch their interest, like Shirley Chisholm or McGovern or anybody that they think that they want for president, or the local level, anyone runs with you, say, what would you do if you were sent to Sacramento or Washington to open up the truth? In Sacramento, it's a California problem, the Bobby Kennedy assassination, the Manson, framing Manson and Frazier. You said each one of them, what would you do about opening up the evidence that the conspiracy exists? And if they say, I won't touch it, like I asked McCloskey when he was here, he says, I accept the Warren report, I just say, well, thank you very much, and I go another way. You don't have to accept these people as your leaders. If they refuse to open up the National Archives and answer the rights to freedom, the access to information, forget about them. I feel that strongly about it. And let them know that you don't have to accept the locking up of these things, that if they want them locked up, you won't give them their support. You can be a registered voter, but you just won't give them support of any kind. I understand that Wayne Morris was here speaking at Hartnell. I didn't hear him, but somebody heard him, and he talked about opening the National Archives and the conspiracy to kill John Kennedy. Of course, he's not running for office now. But he was pretty far out when he did run for office. But let people know. You see, they are, I use expression, and somebody passed on to me, they are the directors, and they tell you what to do, and you're the robot, and you're supposed to take orders. And they don't want you to think you have a mind of your own. So if you simply speak up and say, I know what happened, play any game you want, that's one step. And then the other step that I talked about before is don't pay your taxes. I don't think in the next 2 or 3 weeks I'll have many people joining me in that lawsuit, but I'm not doing it this year because I don't have access to information, and there was a law passed that we could have access to it, and the government's locking up the truth on the assassination, so I'm just not going to pay my taxes this year. I mentioned that at the meeting the other night, and quite a few people applauded, and they could understand very well what I was saying as a solution, and you can think about it next year.
I guess we'll find out more about that on the shows we do after April 17th.
What happens to me. Okay, let's go into a memo now, because the story today in the news is the memo for the ITT hearings and Jack Anderson, and so I thought I'd bring into the program my own memo.
Well, it's not really your memo. It's a copy of the
It's
memo.
in my possession.
It's in your possession.
Yeah. Now,
this is something, when we go into this, excuse me for interrupting, I want to see if we can
clarify
and explain the names of the people on this memo, where it came from, what it is, because it's a little hard.
Okay.
We can see it here in the studio, but of course the people that are listening at home now can't.
Okay, when you do research on the political assassination, the researchers have a standardized code which is used in all publications for references. And WR means we took it from the Warren Report. That's a WR. And the commission hearings refers to the 26 volumes that were published by the the Government Printing Office of the witness testimony before the Warren Commission. Those are the witness hearings, commission hearings. So if you have a memo, a document that says 1CH35, that means volume 1 of the commission hearings, page 35. Then there's commission exhibits, and that's CE, commission exhibits. And those were published, the first 15 volumes of the commission hearings, there's 26 volumes, are witness testimony. And the last 10 volumes, there are 1,000 pages each, are commission exhibits. Now, exhibits could come from the Secret Service. They are reports written of Secret Service, State Department, FBI, CIA. And the commission exhibits are documents gathered by various agencies, the Dallas Police, law enforcement, New Orleans Police, whoever. They're all numbered to refer to as you do your research or want to look up information on the Warren Report. They have commission exhibit or the commission hearing number. Now, in the Warren Commission report, they refer to the commission hearings as the source of their reference. But in addition to the exhibits, in Washington, D.C., in the library of the National Archives, are thousands and thousands of feet of microfilm of letters that the Warren Commission wrote to each other as they were writing their report. If they had any discrepancies or controversies or working memos, they probably kept them. You asked me before, why did they keep this stuff? I think they kept it to go over it while they were working in case there were any errors, in correcting each other. Like one man could say, well, I pointed this out, and they could go over these memos. So in addition to the commission exhibits, in Washington, D.C., in the National Archives, are thousands of working memos, letters of lawyers to the writers of the Warren Report, because first you had the staff investigating, then you had men writing the report up. So back and forth you have letters. You have letters from Mr. Lee J. Rankin, the head attorney, to Earl Warren. You have letters from Mr. Warren, Chief Justice Warren, to J. Edgar Hoover. Questions that need to be answered.
Okay, so what we have in front of us now is a commission exhibit.
It's a memo. It is not an exhibit. It's a letter. It's a copy of a letter of the working staff. I have 1,800 pages of these at my home.
Okay, so this is one of the pieces of paper that was circulated between members of the people writing the report and researchers.
Yes.
This is a photocopy of the microfilm.
Just like the question of the ITT memo is Mrs. Baird writing to another party about a pending matter. Now, David Lifton, who's a very fine researcher, went to Washington. I've never been there. And he went into the National Archives and spent night and day, 2 or 3 weeks, and he took from microfilm various letters or memos that he thought pertained to my work, because this is a vast subject, and I don't cover all of that in my research in detail, although I'm knowledgeable, like the paper bag and different evidence against Oswald. I cover a lot on Lee and Marina Oswald as agents and various places they moved and their activities. So David copied from microfilm the working memos of the lawyers to each other and sent me these copies, which I've been sifting through. So today I'm going to read you the first paragraph of a letter, and then we're going to analyze it for the remainder of the show. It was dated September the 22nd, 1964. Now, that date is important because the Warren Report was sold in October. It was printed. So this memo must have been one of the very last. They go up as late as September 24th, and that's the last printed because they go off to the printer. So September the 22nd, 1964, W. David Slauson, a writer or lawyer for the Warren Report, wrote to Howard Willans, another lawyer or writer for the Warren Report, and the subject he called is pending matters. Now, there's 5 subjects. He brings up 7, rather, in this letter, but we're going to talk about paragraph 1 on pending matters, and it has to do with Oswald's trip to Mexico. I'll read the subject, the paragraph he's written, through once, and then we'll analyze it sentence for sentence.
Okay, that's...
Okay, do you want to take a station break now?
No.
Okay, we'll go another minute.
We've got about 10 minutes.
Oh, I see. It says, now this is the paragraph of David Slauson. Additional or substitute authority from the FBI, period. This is the way he starts it. Reference is made to footnote 563. You can write this down if you want in your Warren Report and look it up. 563, page 307 of Chapter 6. The FBI was simply unable to get us in time a comprehensive list of the Hotel del Comercio guests who have been located in question. Consequently, in addition to the authority already cited, I have inserted a phantom commission exhibit number which can be filled in with something. I believe I have fudged the text sufficiently so that almost anything can be fitted in.
Now, we should say right here that this is not something you made up, this paragraph.
Nothing I had on this show I've never made anything.
It sounds like, somebody might have written this as a way to damn the Warren Commission or the people who put it together. But this is actually, again, part of a memo between 2 members of the research staff and the people writing the Warren Commission report.
One way we could check it out is he's given his research commission exhibit number 3074, and we can look it up and see how much he fudged. Now, this is important. Now we're going to analyze these sentences, and we're going into the Mexican trip about Oswald. We've never done that on a show. He has substitute authority from the FBI.
What is substitute authority?
I have no idea how often it's used or what it means.
But it sounds like it's the authority to put something in the place of something else.
Because he uses the word phantom and he uses the word fudge, and he says, I'll fill it in. So it isn't hard to interpret what substitute authority is. It means that when the Warren Report wants to replace fact with fiction, they have the permission of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It can't be anything else because he's written a phantom number, and he's filled it in, and he's fudged. That's what he went on to say. Now, he says he has substitute authority. So under that, I want to ask you, to ask yourselves, what does substitute authority mean? And the most important thing is, how often did they use it in the Warren Report, and how often does the FBI ever use it? And what is substitute authority? I might add that I have sent a copy of this letter to Jack Anderson, and I thought I should share it with KLRB. He may do nothing with it, but I think we should analyze it and play around with it here ourselves. The second sentence is about the list at the Hotel del Comercio. The FBI did not give the Warren Commission, as of September 22nd, they're going to the printers 2 days later, the list of people that stayed at the hotel with Oswald in Mexico City.
Now, he says the FBI was unable to get the list to us.
Well, they're not holding up the Warren Report till they get it. The FBI has not given it to them. There's no reason why they should go to print if they don't have the list. You see, the FBI was unable. We would have to find out why they were unable or why they allow them to substitute something. This is, if they gave them the permission to substitute, that's a good way to be unable to get the list. Now he says, in addition to the authority already cited above.
Substitute authority.
Yeah, he refers to it again. In addition to the authority already cited, I inserted a phantom CE number. Well, I look up my Random House because I'm not sure what I'm reading, the Random House Dictionary, the big one, and phantom is defined as an image appearing in a dream or formed in a mind or apparition or specter, a thing or person that is little more than appearance, or an appearance without material substance. He says, then he goes on to say, I fudged the text sufficiently. Fudge is to avoid coming to grips with a subject, to evade, to dodge, to cheat, or to welsh. And then he says, almost anything can be fitted in. Now,
what was fitted in?
Well, I'll tell you how the Warren Report wrote the sentence then that he's referring to. It's a particular sentence on the part about Mexico. Now, this whole section here is telling you the permission that this particular man had to write his story. And so I'm going into the research now of the Warren Report. On page 305 that he talks about, it's chapter 6, Oswald in Mexico City, the section proving there was no conspiracy. He talks about Oswald in Mexico City. At page 305, this is the way the Warren Report reads. Quote, investigation of other guests of the hotel who were there when Oswald has failed to uncover anything creating suspicion. See, the investigation failed to uncover it because they had no list. The Warren Report is telling you there was nothing in that hotel that happened, but we see now they had no list, and there was a reason for the list to be held up. And there can be no investigation if there's no list. He says the investigation of the guests failed to uncover anything. There can't be an investigation if you don't have the guest list.
Is this the only reference to Oswald's trip to Mexico?
Well,
or to a visit to Mexico by Oswald?
Well, on chapter 6, they talk about Oswald in Mexico in the chronology of the Warren Report of his daily movements, but there's a chapter trying to prove that there was no conspiracy of Oswald involved with anyone else. So this is the section on conspiracy regarding Mexico City trip. In the same section, further up in the paragraph, the one he was writing and referring, it says in quotes, Warren Report, page 305, all known persons who Oswald may have met while in Mexico, including the guests of the hotel where he stayed, were interviewed. Well, how can the Warren Report say they were interviewed when they don't even have the list? They're going to print and they don't even have the list, and he says they were all interviewed. Now,
read that again, Mae.
The Warren Report, page 305, says all known persons who Oswald may have met while in Mexico, including guests of the hotel where he stayed, were interviewed.
Okay, now, why don't you go back to that memo?
The memo says the memo says regarding the FBI was simply unable to get us in time a comprehensive list of the Hotel del Comercio guests.
Now they say a comprehensive list.
Yeah.
So they must have gotten them some type of list.
They could not get a comprehensive list of those who have been located and questioned. So we don't know if every person in the hotel was located or questioned.
Is there a list in the Warren Commission report of people who were in the hotel when Lee Harvey Oswald was in that Mexico City hotel?
Yes, when the Warren Report came out, they have no list of the people. When the commission hearings were published in December, they had a list of people at the hotel. And it does not indicate that they were interviewed at all because the Warren Report was out. See, they're saying that it's very complicated, but it's very simple. They say no credible witness has been located who saw Oswald with any unidentified person while in Mexico City.
Okay, they say they haven't found a credible witness
who saw Oswald with any unidentified person.
And yet in all the papers, the working papers from the Warren Commission, there's no evidence that anyone was ever interviewed.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
On that note, let's take a break and identify the station. This is KLRB Carmel, Stereo 101.7, serving you 24 hours a day. And this is Dialogue Assassination.
Oh.
Okay, we left off before the station break saying that the Warren Commission had no evidence in their working papers that anyone had ever been interviewed. And is that true?
Well, what the working memo said, for those who just picked it up, was we're talking about a letter of the Warren staff, one lawyer to the other, saying that when the Warren Report was ready to go to print, they were unable to get a comprehensive list of the Hotel del Comercio guests in Mexico City who had been located and questioned.
Comprehensive list.
A comprehensive
So there was a list of some type within the working papers of the commission, but it was not printed in the Warren Report itself.
And no, not at all. And then the important thing was that they made a phantom number, and they were going to fill it in with something and fudge the text, which means whatever the people said We don't know. Just having a list isn't enough. You have to know if they were interviewed.
Yeah, and there's no evidence that they were interviewed?
Well, the FBI went to the hotel, and I'm going to talk about one man who was interviewed extensively. And I think you'll understand why the Hotel del Comercio was very important, because the Warren report says that, again, page 305, all known persons who Oswald may have met while in Mexico, including guests of the hotel where he stayed, were interviewed. Well, to be interviewed is one thing, but to look for a conspiracy is something else. The man that I'm going to talk about just oozes with conspiracy. To interview him and say there was nothing is totally wrong, and I'm going to go in there. But at the Hotel del Comercio where Oswald stayed, he went into Mexico City on a bus with a man named John H. Bowen. He was sitting next to a man named John H. Bowen, and they left Nuevo Laredo and went into Mexico September 26, 1963. And John H. Bowen entered Mexico with a permission slip, which they filled out, saying he was married, he lived in Houston, Texas, he was employed, and he was a resident of Houston.
Now, how do you know he was sitting on the bus next to Oswald?
Well, we're going into that whole chronology now about the bus trip, but John H. Bowen's name is Albert Osborne, and the Warren Commission, the chronology of how they look for Albert Osborne is a long tale, and I'm going to condense it because it's very important. And Bowen was not his name. His name is Albert Osborne. He was not born in Houston. He did not live in Houston. He didn't work in Houston, and he was not married. It was an alias, and he was sitting next to Lee Harvey Oswald on the bus. Now, going back to the Hotel del Comercio, which is very important because...
But how did you know that he was sitting next to him on the bus?
Well, I'll go right to that. Then I thought we'd finish the hotel to show you why Osborne is so important. But
Okay.
We'll go to Osborne if you want. There were 18 passengers on the bus with Lee Harvey Oswald, and the FBI looked for the passengers who came through on the bus with Oswald for one reason. The Mexican government became suspicious because the application to go to Mexico was filled out in New Orleans, and they had a number, a passenger number, like a passport number issued. And there were 5 consecutive numbers, which I have at home. 2 people, Mr. and Mrs. Del Norte, or North, preceded Oswald in line. Then Oswald was the 3rd person, and then Mr. and Mrs. John Menil I believe that's their name, I have it at home, were the passengers in back of Oswald, the applicants in New Orleans on a certain date to come into Mexico. Well, by coincidence, they all left New Orleans, and they all entered Mexico at the same time, 18 miles apart at different borders, and went into Mexico at the same time. These 5 consecutive people that applied in New Orleans to go to Mexico City appeared 2 weeks later, entering Mexico City, and from different points, 18 miles north and south of each other. So somebody got suspicious that maybe they all went in as a group because they entered and left the same way. And there was evidence.
They left Mexico the same way?
Same time. They came in and left, and there was a reason to believe that these people worked as a team with Oswald. And I have their names and their serial numbers at home.
Was Bowen one of those?
No, he wasn't. So the Mexican government and someone in our FBI began to find out who these people were. So they looked at the passenger list because Oswald traveled alone and the others went by car or different transportation, but they all entered at exactly the same time into Mexico City. So the FBI had the request, each one filled out a form, Oswald, of where he lived and what he did or whether he was married or single. They had filled out a form to get into Mexico. So there was a man on the bus named John Bowen who filled out this form. And the FBI wanted to reach everyone who sat with Oswald on that bus. The bus company had a list of everyone who came through on that bus. They keep a passenger list. So they went to Houston for 4 days, and they looked for John Bowen from December 5th to 9th, and they couldn't find him. Then there were 2 more passengers on the bus, Mr. and Mrs. McFarland. So December the 12th, the FBI went to London, England, and they said they remembered Oswald. He sat on the bus in front of them, and he sat with a man who was about 80 years old, who looked about 60, who said he came from Tennessee, that they both spoke English, Oswald and this elderly man, and they spoke English all the time. Mr. and Mrs. McFarland were English. So they interviewed in California, in Los Angeles, 2 other girls, Patricia Winston and Pamela Mumford. And they sat across from Oswald and the Englishman. So there were these English-speaking people, 2 to the left, 2 in back, and Oswald and Bowen on their seat. And Pamela Mumford and Patricia Winston said Oswald was an Englishman, distinct Englishman, going into Mexico City. So the FBI, they had looked for him in Houston, and when they got to England, they were told by the McFarlands that they thought this man came from Tennessee. And so the FBI goes to Tennessee to see if they can find John Bowen. In the meanwhile, January the 1st, the FBI is in Mexico City looking for an Albert Osborne. Now, Albert Osborne is going to turn out to be John Bowen. He has 2 aliases and travels all over the world. The man sitting with Oswald by name was John Bowen on the bus. But everywhere I have 5 indications of people that saw Oswald with an Albert or an Osborne planning the assassination of Kennedy in Mexico City, who could have had contacts through also at the Del Comercio Hotel. Osborne was interviewed January the 1st in Mexico, and I don't know why the FBI was interviewing Albert Osborne, but the night that Lee Oswald was arrested, the FBI asked Maureen Oswald if she knew Albert Osborne. I have a copy of that interview, and they asked her if she knew Albert Osborne. That's the same man that sat on the bus with Oswald going into Mexico City on the name of Bowen.
November 23rd,
Not Maureen
1963?
Oswald. Yes.
She was asked if she knew Albert Osborne.
Yeah. And in New
What
Orleans...
was her answer?
She said she didn't know him. And in New Orleans, when Oswald had pamphlets made for the Fair Play for Cuba, a man named Osborne paid for them. The printer said. This came in later. The Osborne runs through this thing very heavy. Well, they went to Chester, Pennsylvania. They got a tip that John Howard Bowen was born in Chester, Pennsylvania. They went to Tennessee because the McFarlands thought he came from Tennessee. And they went through all the files in Tennessee, and there was a John Howard Bowen who was born. It said he was registered by birth to be born in Chester, Pennsylvania, and had lived in Houston. But in the FBI files in Tennessee, June the 4th, 1942, John Howard Bowen was charged with tearing down the American flag, stomping it in the ground, wanting Hitler to win the war, and spending a lot of time in Mexico City. Now, Oswald, this is the man that was on the bus with Oswald going into Mexico City. Oswald's closest friend in the Dallas-Fort Worth area was George de Mohrenschildt, who was apprehended by the FBI and followed from New York to Corpus Christi, right to the coast of Mexico, and suspected of drawing installations as a Nazi spy during World War II. Okay, we'll get back to Bowen. They went to all the newspapers in Knoxville, Tennessee, and dug up articles about a John Bowen who resided in Tennessee, and this was the lead from the McFarlands in England. I thought he had mentioned that state. And they got information that John Bowen also lived in Laredo, Texas, but he was a missionary, and he traveled all around. And in the Knoxville, Tennessee paper had an article 1 week before the killing of Kennedy, November the 14th, 1963, that John Bowen was traveling in Europe. This was a social thing in the Tennessee newspaper, that John Bowen was in Europe. This was the man on the bus with Oswald. Now, they looked up the early papers, and in April 1958, they had an article in the Knoxville paper written by a man named Albert Osborne in Mexico City, who sent a news article to Knoxville about John Howard Bowen. Now, this man is sending an article, but he's living in Mexico City.
Albert Osborne in Mexico sends a news article
about
to Knoxville, Tennessee about John Howard Bowen, who you contend is the same person.
Oh, he absolutely is the same person. The FBI interviewed Osborne in Mexico, and February the 1st, and he didn't know who Bowen was at all. He says, I don't know where he is, but he could be in New Orleans, or he could be. He mentioned a certain place in Texas where he could be, in Laredo, Texas, the Anthony Hotel, Laredo, Texas. February the 17th, the FBI interviewed Osborne again, and he didn't know anything about Bowen. He says his mail comes down. He has a missionary near Owaco, Texas, but he doesn't know a thing about Bowen. February the 28th, the FBI interviewed Osborne again, and he didn't know he knew who Bowen was, and he's written about him, and they're close friends, but he didn't know his whereabouts. The FBI knew through the Knoxville paper that Bowen had gone to Europe November the 14th, and he had returned. But they're interviewing him down there now in February. He'd made a quick trip to Europe, and he was back after the assassination. March the 3rd, they showed pictures to Osborne because they went to this hotel, Laredo, Texas, and people worked at that hotel, and people worked at a hotel in New Orleans where he stayed, Bowen stayed. They had pictures of Osborne that they were interviewing. They had pictures of Bowen they were looking for. And on March the 3rd, 1964, the FBI confronted Bowen, and he admitted that he was Osborne and Bowen, one and the same, but he denied knowing Oswald. And he said he was never on a bus with Oswald. He didn't remember him. But 4 other English-speaking people remembered him very well. If he denied who he was all this time under that pressure, And Patricia Winston, Pamela Mumford, and the McFarlands had sent the clue that this man spoke English, was an Englishman. So he lied about being on the bus because the McFarlands talked to him about it. He lied entering Mexico because his name was Bowen, not Osborne. He lied about not knowing Oswald. He said some Mexican boy slept next to him and never woke up. He never talked to him. And he lied in the Knoxville papers because he's writing about himself. He's Osborne sending in stuff about Bowen. Now that's...
May have any of the passengers on the bus that Oswald and Osborne allegedly, sat next to each other on, have they ever identified a picture of him?
Oh, yes. Ever they were showing the pictures and everything, yeah.
They say that he was on the bus with
yeah.
Oswald.
Oh, but they sent the clue. They were right that he was English, Canadian. They were right. He has a Canadian passport, it turns out. He is Canadian. They were right about his coming from Tennessee. They gave the FBI the clues. It just took them a long time to find this guy. And Oswald mentioned on the bus, this is very interesting, in volume 25, page 21, Oswald tells the girls, these two girls they were from Australia going to L.A., and they said, where should we stay in New Mexico? And Oswald said, recommend the Hotel Cuba. He said, I stayed there several times. This is volume 25, page 21. Now, the Warren report says Oswald made one trip to Mexico. And New York Times...
But this reference, this quote from Oswald saying that
he stayed there
several times is in what?
In the commission hearings, Warren Commission, not the
Warren report. Never made
it
to the report.
Never made to the report, no. And in the commission hearings, volume 25, page 585, is a report of a man who did research on Oswald for the New York Times. And in quotes, he says, Oswald followed a lonely path during his recent visits to Mexico. Now, Senator Richard Russell of the Warren Commission, made a public statement several times. It's on record saying Oswald made several visits to Mexico.
But the Warren report doesn't acknowledge that.
It says he made one. Yeah. Now, Osborne Bowen, this character who is lying repeatedly, and it was hard to bring in how much material. I have about 80 typewritten pages on the interaction of this particular man and where he's been and who funds him and his background with the Defense Intelligence Agency. Osborne Bowen came from a town called Oaxaca, Mexico. That's where he came originally from. And in volume 25, page 29, the people that stayed at the hotel where Oswald stayed at the Hotel del Comercio were from Oaxaca, Mexico. Now, before we go back to Osborne or Bowen, let's go back to Hotel del Comercio, because this is how we got started. The memo says that FBI did not turn over to the Warren Commission staff when they were going to print. They were unable to get the list of the guests located in question at Hotel del Comercio, so they had this phantom exhibit. So I'm going to cite for you volume number and page number, which may go too fast for you to look up, but if you, again, have my address now. If you want it, send me a postcard or a letter. I'll send it off to you, and I'll have it in a book someday soon. Volume 25, page 824, is from Oswald at the Hotel del Comercio. And I have a list of many guests. I won't read them off. It's a long list. But there were some interesting people, three of them. One was Antonio Olivia, who was a black male, and Irma, a gal that was with Antonio, and Tony. And Oswald was seen with these people. Antonio and Tony were Cubans, and Oswald was seen in their company. And the hometown they came from was Oaxaca, Mexico. And Antonio Olivia, and Irma, his girlfriend, came from the same town that Albert Osborne, Bowen, came from. Now, by itself, that's a big town, and it may be a coincidence that Oswald stayed at the hotel and was associated with these particular people who came from the same town as the man that he sat with on the bus. That may just be a coincidence. But in volume 25, page 593, at the Hotel del Comercio, a man testifies or sends an FBI affidavit. He was never called as a witness before the commission, but a man resembling Oswald, who was a young American, met with some Cuban blacks. There were two men and one woman, and they sat denouncing Castro. They were violently anti-Castro Cubans. So when you say he sat with Cubans, you have to define what was the nature of the conversation. This man heard anti-Castro conversation, and there were two men. We have two men here, Antonio and Tony, and you have a woman, Irma. And this man saw Oswald with these people. Another party saw him with these. In volume 24, page 648, this is another volume, three men saw Oswald conversing, one with a tall, thin Negro, he doesn't mention his name, who could possibly be Olivia, but tall, thin Negro, and a man with a Canadian passport, and Oswald in front of the Cuban consulate. Now, this man who's testifying in Volume 24, or not testifying, he's giving a FBI report or to the Mexican police. What he's saying is, I saw three men conversing. One was a tall, thin Negro, one with a Canadian passport, and one with Oswald in front of the Cuban consulate. And the conversation was, I want to kill the men. The people back there are waiting for me. And he saw the Negro, the Canadian, the American exchanging money. Now, the Canadian, Albert Osborne is a Canadian. He isn't mentioned by name. And there was a black, Olivia, who was seen by two other people with Oswald in a hotel. This is in front of the Cuban consulate. Now, in Volume 24, on page 641, there's allegations of somebody who used to be a friend of Oswald. And he knew a man named Albert. He doesn't define his last name, but he knows an Albert. And there were three more people in June and July of 62. This is much earlier. He's down there later in the fall. But if he's made other trips, which has been almost verified, that this is possible. And they were planning to kill Kennedy. And Oswald flew in.
They say almost verified, May.
Well,
that's kind of, I don't want to let that go by.
Don't let it, no, don't. It can actually be verified that Oswald made more than one trip to Mexico, even though the Warren report.
Has it been verified, though?
By hotel accommodations and so forth. No, just by multiple witnesses. And, well, let's put it this way. If we could open up the Warren report hearings, which is what I really aim to do, there would be a way to get transportation lists of airplane flights from Jamaica, like you have from the bus going to Mexico City.
If they haven't been destroyed yet.
Yeah, what I should say is if we had access to the investigative powers that are needed to solve a murder crime, it could be verified that he made more than one trip.
Okay, so the evidence is
available, I'm sure, but
the hard evidence itself, the physical evidence.
Oh yeah. No,
but what you have now is statements by many people, by witnesses.
Yeah, that he's been there before.
That he's been there. Okay.
And by himself. But if the Warren Commission wants to say he went to Mexico, this time they show the bus ticket. But if we could subpoena or get the airline tickets of the Jamaica flights, it would be easily discoverable whether or not he was. Because, see, this is what the Warren Commission should have done. When there was an allegation, a commission exhibit that Oswald flew from Jamaica, there was no reason why the Warren Commission couldn't ask for those flight numbers like they did the trip to Mexico City. Because he said that Oswald came in from Jamaica with a man by the name, they said an American, English speaking, by the name of Albert, who arrived from Jamaica, and there were three more people, and they discussed the elimination of President Kennedy. See, there is the three people, the Cubans, the black man, Albert, they interchange him. Either he's Albert, or an Englishman, but he certainly fits the description, you see. Now, volume 26, on page 204, in Denver, Colorado, there's a restaurant called the Profile Room, Ramon's Restaurant. In June 63, there was a conversation. It's written up at length. I just brought a resume of volume 26, page 204, a conversation with a man, Lee Osborne, who discussed how Kennedy wouldn't finish up his term. He was going to be killed. And that movie then would wipe out.
Who's Lee Osborne? Well, that's an unusual combination of Lee Harvey Oswald and Albert Osborne.
Well, this is why I bring it in, because, I'm so frustrated in 1 hour always, because when you get into one subject and hopefully whet appetites, we could go into the use of Osborne like the pamphlet in New Orleans. It doesn't mean anything, but it means everything. Lee Osborne is a very funny combination that the Warren Commission keeps saying there's no conspiracy. Wouldn't it whet your appetite to know which Lee Osborne is talking about the elimination of Kennedy?
Are you talking about Albert Osborne there, or Lee Harvey Oswald, or Lee Harvey Osborne, or...
Well, there's an interchangeable. There was a man that came through the bus the same day as Lee Harvey Oswald to Mexico, O.H. Lee, that used the alias that Lee is to use later in Dallas. They used that same name. And then he signed something like Roberto Oswald on the bus slip, which is his brother's name.
Well, May, you're citing volume 26, page 204. How did this Lee Osborne testimony, this alleged Lee Osborne testimony, come into the working papers?
Well, the Warren report and the men who wrote it, the Warren report, didn't use this information, but they collected.
Yeah, but it's an
FBI report.
Where did that come from? I mean, how did they find out that somebody in a restaurant
in Denver... The FBI interviewed the person that gives their name, their occupation, their name. Somebody called the FBI and evidently said, I have information about I have one whole section of research on foreknowledge of assassination. Somebody from Knott's Berry Farm heard another man talking about the killing of Kennedy under foreknowledge of assassination.
Yeah, well, I'm wondering why you brought this particular thing up. Is it because Ramon's restaurant is a Mexican restaurant? Or?
No, well, I didn't even think about that. What I brought it up was that there's an allegation.
Or it looks like it's a Mexican restaurant?
Well, there's an allegation in volume 24 of a June or July 62 planning to kill Kennedy.
63 you had.
Yeah. But in this particular thing, I brought it up because the name Lee Osborne would make you want to know why that was used, but the commission doesn't ask or call the person who as a witness. The person who heard the conversation was never called as a witness.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah, and you never looked up this person. Now, the last evidence of this particular Canadian, Albert, and so forth, is volume 26, page 417. It's a letter written by a Mexican. He's very humble and plain. It's dated December the 31st, 1964, and it's unsigned, and he has confidence in Robert Kennedy. He writes this very gushy letter. I'll read you part of it. He says, I do not trust anyone but you. I have information referring to the death of your brother. My information may be helpful. I am willing to identify them. It concerns the whole plan to be carried out. Is a friend of Albert. Three other people plan to kill your brother. Oswald, Albert, and 2 others. Now that's the letter. It's in volume 26, page 417.
Planned to kill your brother.
They planned, yeah. You're looking at my bad time. They planned to kill your brother.
Okay.
Albert, Oswald, and 2 others.
Okay, now it wouldn't be, with Oswald accused and dead, it wouldn't have been too hard to accuse Oswald of planning it. But the mention of Albert.
Well, Albert comes through this whole thing. Yeah, so let's get back as time allows, like for Albert, and then we'll try to summarize what we're saying.
Well, I just want to go over that again, maybe, before we leave it.
Go ahead.
Not this particular thing, but the instances you've all cited, these references from the Warren Commission hearings.
Yes.
These all are made in the hearings. The authenticity of these isn't gone into, but with all these references to Albert and an Osborne and
Canadian
and multiple trips to Mexico by Lee Harvey Oswald that are indicated in these, that's all summed up in one paragraph as far as his trips to Mexico, in one sentence really, in the Warren Commission report again, which you mentioned before.
That's right. They just
they've lumped all that together.
All that together. We'll repeat it. All known persons who Oswald may have met while in Mexico, including the guests of the hotel where he stayed, were interviewed. That's not true.
And the conclusion from that if it's not true, you've shown, the conclusion that they draw from that is that what?
Well, they come because there's no conspiracy in Mexico. What the Warren report says is we interviewed every person we could on the bus, everybody at the hotel, anyone he saw at the Cuban consulate, and there's no evidence of a conspiracy. That is the way the Warren report writes it. But when we go back to the letter from W. David Slauson to Willans, he has the authority to substitute what he wants. He doesn't have the list of who was at the Del Comercio. He can make a phantom exhibit of who was there if he wants it, and he can fill it in what he wants, and then he says, I fudged the text. So what I'm trying to do in this hour is to show how they not only fudge it, see, they have to write, and let me summarize how the Warren report is written. They have to write a thing, every sentence is the creation. We could do a continuous series on the creation of it. It's like a novel. It's the structuring of a novel. And no part of it has any basis in fact. This is why, like we've been on the air 8 months, and I could take one show a week. A friend from L.A. called last night. She says, how's the radio show going? I said, it's frustrating. I could do an hour a day. I could take one sentence of the Warren report and go back, because I've done 8 years of research. So I can take one sentence from this document and spend an hour.
Well, you don't mean to say that there's nothing in the Warren report that's based on fact.
Well, Mark Lane has a sentence which describes it. He says there's 2 sentences that are true. Lee Harvey Oswald is dead, and President John Kennedy is dead. They were both killed, and that's true. And outside of that, it's very hard. When Representative Talcott was at the House, and I told him the book was all fiction, he got very offended. So I handed the book. I said, here, read me a sentence. Just read me one, and I'll go to my research file and show you how it was created. Now, that's a pretty challenging thing to do, but I can do it. And so we didn't get a chance to try to experiment. How much time do we have now? Because I can go into Bowen a little more, and how the discussion with Bowen and his background. Do we have time for that?
About 5 minutes here.
Okay. Now,
I don't think if we left it now, you'd have screaming listeners calling the station to complain.
Okay. I'm going to tell you about Mr. Bowen when they found him. he had been traveling around in Alabama at Baptist churches. He was en route to Laredo by way of New Orleans. Originally, he said he was born in Chester, Pennsylvania. They checked that out. It wasn't true. He said that he had no known relatives on these certificates in Chester, Pennsylvania. He has a brother and sister living in England. He worked for the Tennessee Valley Authority in Knoxville, Tennessee for 30 years. He traveled in the southern part of the United States. He's an itinerant Baptist, numerous trips to Mexico City. He told the FBI on February the 8th he had never been to Canada, England, or a foreign country. Actually, he's been to Canada, England, Jamaica, and all over the world he's traveled. He told every time he met the FBI and was interviewed, he told them things that were totally untrue. On the February 8th interview, when they saw John Bowen, before spilling out what he really did, he gave the background of his background with the church. He said he lived in Oaxaca, Mexico in 1958, and he said he had lived at the same hotel where Albert Osborne had lived, a Baptist minister. This was the same man that was going to be identified as the same person. Now, Albert Osborne is a traveling minister, and he has funds that come from all over the Southwest. And he's a Baptist. And what I want to do is just briefly read you some of the churches that are giving him money, because people were called, the FBI did reports on different people that were funding this church down in Mexico. And they called her Mrs. Virgil Dykes in Indianapolis. She never met Bowen, but she contributed to that church starting 2 years ago. Since January 1964, she's supporting that missionary, and she's never heard of Osborne. Mrs. Eugene Loving from Oregon, from the Pentecostal Church, said she knew these two names loosely, Osborne and Bowen, and she didn't know much about them, and the last letter she got from them destroyed, but every month she sends them money down to the church. Reverend, it's H-L-U-C-H-A-N, from the Pentecostal Church in Eagle Pass, Texas. He says Osborne isn't connected with any specific religious denomination. He uses two names. They didn't know of any ministerial training he had, but he's receiving funds down in Mexico from these various organizations, and some don't. That when the commission came to take evidence from them, not testimony, but just exhibits, they burned their last letters, or they were funding him. They knew he wasn't a doctrinated priest. He gave religious instructions to Mexican boys at his residence. Now, I have information about what Mr. Osborne was doing down in Mexico City and his relationship to J. Edgar Hoover, but it isn't in the commission hearings, and it has to be verified more closely before we go into it. But he had these men coming to his home where he, in quotes, gave religious instructions. But he was never known to be connected with any other missionary work. He is connected with the Defense Intelligence Agency. He is not a missionary connected. Okay, Mr. George Fuller in Virginia sent money to Bowen to Mexico. He couldn't recall his address, but he's been sending him money regularly. Mrs. Louise Frawley from Virginia sends Bowen money for 6 years from Mississippi to Mexico. She never met him until 2 years ago, and she sends him $50 in clothes she's been sending regularly for 6 years. This is the funding of Bowen, John Bowen, Albert Osborne, who went into Mexico.
Where's all this testimony coming from regarding Bowen?
The 26 in volume 25 of the commission hearings. You can get them out at the Monterey Peninsula Library, and enough people are listening to Schofield that the Carmel Library has ordered a set of volumes of the commission hearings. So people in Carmel who have any intellectual curiosity or any curiosity can be looking these up. It's in volume 25. And Mrs. White from Pikeville, Tennessee, sends $35 monthly to Mr. Bowen. It's never been solicited. She's never met him. She only contacts him through the mail. She knows nothing about his background. He is being funded through church groups. I could go on. We could do an hour of the funding of this particular person in Mexico, money pouring in to support his operations, and he sat with Oswald. The Warren Commission tells you there was no conspiracy in Mexico, and the commission staff, 1 week before they went to print, is telling you they have fudged the text about the Mexican experience.
It's a mind blower. Where is John Bowen now? Do you know? Or Albert Osborne?
Well, Bud Fensterwald from the Committee to Investigate Assassinations told me about 6 months ago that he thought he meant a violent death, that he was stabbed in Laredo, Texas, but I asked Richard Sprague, who was here this last week, if he's alive, and it hasn't been verified that he was killed.
So
He
the
resides
search is on.
and he does go up to Vancouver, in the Seattle, Vancouver, a lot when he's alive, if he's alive. We don't know.
Been interesting. We're torn apart one piece of paper, one memo, and wow.
It's very important that people understand that these were phantom commission exhibits, and we want to know how many more there are.
That was my question.
How
You
many?
have documented one case where permission has been given to fudge a little. And how many other times have you ever found any other instances where
They wrote
that's
down?
it's been admitted that there was some fudging done?
Well, I know there were outright lies. I never saw them write it in a memo. We're going to lie about this.
KLRB.
But this is the year of truth, and we're talking about memos in Washington, so I think that KLRB should talk about that memo.
Carmel.
This is Dialogue Assassination with political research specialist Mae Brussell. I'm Phil Kogan.